The door opened with a loud creaking sound, and then a bump as it hit the wall. As I stood there staring into the room, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. It was a room just like the doll room, lined with shelves and a singular window on in the back of the room. But this one was filled with something else. They looked like dolls in nature, but were very different from what normal dolls look like. I recognized them right away. They were the same type of dolls as what the native peoples had. They were carved from wood, small in nature, some bigger than others, yet all roughly the same size. They were simple yet beautiful, and being made with scraps of hand-woven cloth and pieces of leather, and painted with bright colors. As I stood staring at them, I heard a voice excitedly say from behind me, "Those are Kachina dolls." I whipped around to see Deb standing there. In the dark, she looked very different, almost pale in the moonlight. "They're what?" I asked. "They're Kachina dolls. My people made these ones long ago by the look of it." She passed by me and entered into the room to get a closer look at them. They were made in likeness of the spirits they embody. They can embody anything, from an element to a cosmic being, an ancestor or the spirit of just about anything. You see, my people believed that everything held a spirit, and they used these dolls to educate the children of the tribes of their heritage. Wait, if they embody spirits, does that mean... Before I could finish my statement, one of the dolls fell from its shelf. Great, just great, I thought. I survived the demon dolls in the other room, and as far as I knew, those didn't even embody actual spirits. Or did they? Either way, I didn't want to find out if these did. I looked at the doll on the floor. Deb looked at the doll on the floor. We looked at each other, and then back at the doll. Then, almost as if I had jinxed the situation by just thinking about it, the doll began to roll back and forth, and then it stood upright and stayed still as a rock. Nothing in the room moved for half a second. Then suddenly, all at once, the dolls began to one by one fall from their shelves, hitting the floor. We hopped over them as they did the exact same thing as the first doll had, and Deb moved closer to me. We both stood there gazing at the fallen dolls as they rolled, then sat up, then stayed still. "What are they doing?" I whispered to Deb, afraid that if I spoke too loud they would attack us. "I have no idea, but they don't seem happy." "Well, what do we do? Do we put them back on the shelves and turn them to the wall like the other ones?" "I don't think that'll work. These aren't like those dolls. Those dolls they're just different," she replied. Right then, as Deb finished speaking, the dolls all began to wobble, waddle, and walk towards us slowly. We backed up, and before I could figure out what to do next, Deb grabbed my hand and jerked me from the room, slamming and locking the door behind us as she grabbed a set of keys from my hand. She then ran down the hall, dragging me behind her as we went. And when we finally reached the bottom step of the grand staircase, we heard a loud banging from above and behind us. The dolls were trying to escape, and something told me they would be successful. We then ran from the hotel, locking those doors behind us as well, and out onto the street. Deb paused for a moment, trying to figure out where the best place to go was. In the distance, we saw a bright light coming from the post office. We saw it right about the same time, and with an understanding look between us, we ran for it. We stumbled up the stairs as we went, out of breath, more from fear than anything, and tried to open the door. It was locked. We started banging on the door, calling out to see if someone would open it. Then the door swung open, and I could see that it was Jasper on the other side. Hurry up and come in before they get you," he whispered loudly. I didn't think twice before skirting past him and into the brightly lit room. Once inside, I could see we weren't the only ones there. There were dozens of people, all ranging from young to old and men and women alike. I recognized the librarian as one of the group. As soon as we were inside, the door slammed shut behind us, and in the not-so-far distance a crack of thunder pealed, the first of many to come on that night. I turned to look at Jasper, who had walked from the door over to the window. Looking out, he stared for many minutes. "What in the hell is going on?" I asked, now becoming even more fretful. Jasper didn't even turn from looking out the window and replied, "It's the anniversary of the night the natives attacked the town. It happened on this night long ago." "What does that mean?" I asked, as Deb stayed dead silent behind me. "It means that she," he said, pointing a finger at Deb, "came to call on the spirits of her dead ancestors to attack us yet again. It happens every year like clockwork." I looked back at Deb, who was now looking at the floor, trying not to make eye contact with any of us in the room. "You did what?" I asked her. "I thought you said you'd come to pay homage to the dead in remembrance of the ones who were lost. Is that not true?" "Yes, it is," she responded quickly. "I just also call on the spirits to rise from the dead to walk the earth once again." I was flabbergasted. The phone entity had tried to warn me of her, and I didn't listen. Why didn't I listen? Now what lay in store for all of us tonight? I assumed that the other people in the town were the other townspeople that I had yet to meet. Now we were all trapped in this dingy, small building, with no weapons to speak of and an army of the dead and evil dolls coming for us. Just my luck. Why had I taken this job again? If I had known how kind you were, I would have never called upon them. Was that what you were doing this morning? Did you lie about that too? And what do you mean if you had known how kind I was? Why does that make a difference, and what about all the other people here? Don't they matter too? I replied, growing angry. Deb fell silent and looked once again to the floor. "It don't matter now. What's done is done. We need to prepare for their coming," Jasper stated seriously. "What can I do to help?" I asked as I straightened up and squared my jaw. If there was going to be a fight, I was going to be ready. Jasper stared at me for a long minute, and then he said, "Follow me. We're all here now." With that, he walked to the back of the room in a few short strides and grabbed the end of the bed that sat in the corner of the room. "Help me move this," he grunted as he attempted to move it on his own. I hurried over and grabbed the other end. Together, we pushed it aside, revealing a hidden trap door in the floor. Once the bed was fully pushed aside, he commanded, "Everyone inside, hurry." Everyone began, one at a time, to pile inside. I was one of the last to go in, with only Deb and Jasper behind me. Once inside, Jasper followed Deb down, and he closed the door shut and locked it behind him. Now we were in complete and utter darkness. I could hear Jasper feeling around in the dark for something, but I wasn't sure. I hadn't seen anything when I first dropped down, but I wasn't really looking though. At last, he found what he was looking for, the familiar sound of a match being struck against the wood of the ladder that led down into the hole filled the air along with bright light. He lit a lamp that stood on the far end of the wall away from me, illuminating the entire place. And there were two other lamps besides that were also lit and given to other people at the beginning and middle of the group of the people that Deb had come down with us. Deb, Jasper, and I took up the rear. The group began to move almost in tandem with each other, as if this had been rehearsed time and time again. We followed the group through the dark, wet cavern until we came to a fork in the path. "Turn right," Jasper yelled out as quietly as he could. As the group began to turn to the right and follow that path, I looked at Jasper and asked him, "What is this place?" "After we drove the native people from the land, we knew there would probably be retribution at some point. so we tried to create a safe place away from the main town where we could hide and hold up for a defense. So you picked an underground cavern as your last stand? Well, at least you wouldn't have to bury your dead. Jasper looked at me a little hurt, but quickly regained his composure. What would you suggest as a safe place? The same land they lived and breathed and worked on for hundreds of years? I got the point. Okay, but surely there was someplace better. I mean, you all had guns and ammo. Why didn't you just defend the hotel yourselves? That was the original plan, but the hotel got overrun. We had nowhere else to go but here. Did it work? The underground caverns, I mean. They served their purpose. They saved the lives of many of the townspeople. We stayed here for several days after the attack before we came up for air. We stored rations and bedding down here just in case they were ever needed. So we had plenty of canned food to last us a few days and warm places to sleep, he replied as we came to another fork in the path where it split into 3 different ways. Then, almost on cue as if they had prepared for this 100 times before, the group split in 3 smaller groups and each entered into one of the 3 tunnels. The front third of the group stayed straight and went into the middle tunnel. The middle of the group went to the far left, and the back of the group went into the far right. We traveled along for what seemed like half a mile before we came to a more open cavern that had been hewn to make it into a larger space. In the room towards the back was the aforementioned food crates and bedding. The cavern was so large and damp it gave me chills. No sooner had we entered the underground room did we hear a loud banging and crashing noise echoing throughout the halls and tunnels. It appeared that they had gotten in and were coming our way. As I stood there gazing through the dark as if I had x-ray vision and could see them long before they appeared, I heard scuffling behind me and the shucking of a shotgun. I quickly rolled around to see Jasper holding it out to me. I don't know how to use a gun. I've never used one in my life, I told him. Don't matter. Look, I'll show you, he said as he turned me around to face the mouth of the tunnel. And placing his arms over me and the gun in my hands, he showed me how to load, aim, and shoot the gun. If you think it's too far away to hit, just wait till it comes a little closer. This gun'll knock a huge hole in whatever you're shooting at. What if I don't want to shoot anyone? What if I can't? I asked as I pointed the gun at the floor. Either you shoot or you die. Simple as that, he stated, while walking away to help the others. I stood there for a minute just staring at the gun. I didn't want to use it. I didn't want to end someone's life. I didn't want to fight. But I also didn't want to die that night in some underground tomb. I made the decision only to shoot if necessary, and only if there was no other way out. I turned to look behind me at the others, all preparing for a fight to the death. They had no qualms about fighting, so why did I? Soon we could hear a chanting in the distance. They had entered the tunnels. In a panic, I ran to the back wall of the room, while the others, preparing for the battle, stood in a line towards the middle of the room. Deb stood with me, a strange calm to her. She didn't have a gun. I guess the others hadn't given her one. Stay with me. I'll keep you safe, she told me. Oh, please. You're the one that caused this to happen. Why do you care now? I didn't realize the kind of person you were. You're different than all the others. I can't quite put my finger on it, but you are nonetheless. Oh, I'm sorry. Once this is over, I'll leave and never return. This won't ever happen again. I stayed silent, mulling her words over in my mind. Before I could speak to ask her the most obvious question, like why she had done this seemingly to me specifically, we heard screams and yelling from down the way. With every second that passed, we could hear them approaching closer and closer. I clutched the gun to my chest and tried to prepare for whatever was next. The sounds were coming closer, a deep guttural chanting from within the tunnels. With every heartbeat, my pulse quickened with the fear of the unknown. I had the gun clutched to my chest, fully loaded and ready to shoot. If only I had the courage to fight. I took a few steps forward and stood in the line of the townspeople. As I stood there, I looked down the line at Jasper, who stood there looking back at me. He gave me a nod and resumed his stance. All too soon, the band of warriors and kachinas came through the mouth of the tunnel. The warriors were large and frightening to behold. Armed with bows and arrows, spears and knives, they came at us, charging into the line. The kachinas weren't too far behind. As they came closer, they began to transform into what they represented. Some were great warriors. Others were giant animals with bared teeth, and some were gods come to life, all here to avenge their people from long ago. The townspeople charged then as I lagged behind. Never before had I fought in a battle. I wasn't prepared for what I watched before me. The townspeople charged the warriors and kachinas as the ground began to rumble and shake. There was blood and gore as the warriors mauled and shot arrows into the group. Everyone was yelling and screaming, some in pain and others in a battle cry. The warriors themselves were mere shadows of what they had probably once been, their bodies charred and broken. The smell of burnt flesh hung in the air wherever they stood. The kachinas were fearsome to behold. They came in all shapes and sizes, some small and some large. They were terrible in their wrath and were 10 times stronger than a normal human. They looked as if they could lift a person up, break their bodies, and throw the corpse against the wall. I dodged and weaved where I could, avoiding the scuffle and staying out of the fray, until I came face to face with the largest kachina of them all, and I recognized him as the first doll that had fallen off of the shelf in the hotel. He was huge, standing at least 7 feet tall, wide and broad shoulders that spanned the length of my tiny frame. I felt like a dwarf in comparison to the mighty warrior. He held a spear in his right hand, long and straight, with the tip made of the hardest stone, sharp and pointed. He wore a terrible mask, and painted red, yellow, and white, with black accents that drove terror deep into my heart. I knew I wouldn't last in a fight with him. I didn't even stand a chance. I couldn't fight and I couldn't run, so I did the next best thing I could possibly think of. I surrendered. I laid down the gun at my feet and held my hands up in surrender. I then said the words that probably saved my life that night. I'm sorry, I said, maintaining my stance. I wish I could undo what has been done to your people, but I can't. It's not within my power to do so. But I promise as long as I live, I will pay my respects to those that were lost and continue to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. With that, the kachina paused and looked at me for a long moment, lowering its spear, no longer waiting to drive it deep within my heart. He backed up, and as he did so, he grew smaller and smaller, until he was no bigger than the doll that fell from the shelf and stopped moving. At that time, I began to notice all around me that the other kachinas did the same. The warriors stopped fighting also, and stood back as a strong wind coursed through the tunnels, blowing away the warriors like ash till there was nothing left. The battle was over, with nothing left behind but the kachina dolls that sat on the floor. A confused muttering began amongst the townspeople. As they looked confused back and forth from one another, I saw Jasper come forward from where he had been fighting, looking every bit as confused as the others. "Well, that's never happened before," he said, looking at the ground where the kachina doll sat. In the back of the room, I heard Deb chime in. "That's because no one ever apologized before. Ever." "What do you mean, apologized?" Jasper asked. "Everyone has always fought against my people, and for over 200 years on the anniversary of the night raid, No one has ever done anything but fight. She just apologized for all those years and everything that had been done. No one has ever done that before. The spirits accepted her apology and her humility. Well, if your people didn't come to curse the town again and again every year, we would have never had to fight, Jasper said as he raised his voice. And if your people hadn't kept always repeating the same mistakes, we wouldn't have to keep teaching you the same lesson, Deb responded in kind. Enough, you two, I yelled. It doesn't matter who did what. The only thing that matters is coming to an agreement and making a better way forward. They both looked solemn yet stern, but both had to admit I was right. The night of the raid on the native peoples, the white settlers were in the wrong. The night of the raid on the townspeople, when they cursed the town, the Pueblo peoples had been in the wrong. While one side took what didn't belong to them, and the other understandably sought retribution for what had been done, both sides had caused permanent damage that couldn't be undone, and that led to both sides becoming the bitterest of foes. No one side was in the right, but they could set aside their differences and reach a parley. Why no one had thought of this sooner seemed ridiculous to me. After everyone had regained their bearings, we began to take count of those left. To my surprise, despite the obvious bloodshed, everyone was still alive and only a little worse for wear. We gathered up the injured and helped them walk out of the tunnels, while the rest of the townspeople stayed behind to clean up and place the guns back where they belonged. As we came to the second fork where all three tunnels divulged together, we met up with the other townspeople. They were as bloodied and disheveled as I'm sure the rest of us were, looking pretty rough, I imagined. We all walked to where all first came through and climbed the ladder up to the post office. Once inside, I could see the light of dawn shining through the front windows, drowning out the artificial light of the bulbs that dangled from the ceiling. Once we were all inside, we proceeded to the front of the building and turned behind to assess the damage. The door in the front had been completely torn off its hinges, and scattered shards of wood lay everywhere within. It looked as though a large battering ram had come through the door. The place was a total mess. The windows were broken and every item lay strewn about the room. Nothing was in its place by the looks of it, and it would take a good while to clean and repair all the damage. Exhausted and weary, I sought to leave the post office to return to the hotel to assess the damage that had been done there. I silently, just as everyone else, stepped over the threshold and the shattered door into the light of the morning sunrise. We had all lived to see another day, and for that I was grateful. As I stepped into the dawn, I took a deep breath of fresh air as I turned to look at the others. They came one by one into the light, and before my eyes vanished into a fine mist as if they had never been there at all. I was shocked. The only one who didn't disappear before my eyes was Jasper. He remained on the front porch, leaned up against the poles that held it up. New day dawning. You ladies get back to the hotel, are you hear? Jasper said as he cocked his head back with a little flick. Get some rest now. As we headed back to the hotel, we saw the many footprints in the earth where the dead and the Kachinas had walked. Deb and I walked silently side by side as we went, neither of us speaking a word. Once we reached the door of the hotel, I was shocked by the damage. The windows looked as if they had exploded outward into the street. The door, much like the one at the post office, was barely hanging from its hinges, shattered and shredded. Inside, there were shards of broken vases strewn all over the floor. There were chairs flung into the walls, broken and battered, and there were items from the counter flung haphazardly all over the place. Oh my goodness, what did they do to the hotel? It's ruined. The hotel had been but a casualty in the rampage of the night before. It was going to take me a century to clean and refurbish the place. I felt responsible for the hotel's marring because everything happened on my watch. What was I going to do? I didn't even have the number of the owners, Mary and Martha. So many questions without answers ran through my head, until finally, a question popped up to the surface that I needed to have answered. As I turned around in the lobby to face Deb, who was solemnly looking around the room, I finally found the words to ask my question. "Deb?" "Yeah?" "In the tunnels, you and Jasper both said this had been a yearly occurrence for over 200 years. Why?" "Well," Deb began, as she walked to the stairs and sat down on them. "Long ago, after the town and hotel had been built, when the night raid by my people had happened, there was so much that went on that night. The townspeople were fast asleep, and my people saw the opportunity to strike. So they did." "Yeah, I saw that in a dream I had. They came and attacked the town, but they cursed it as well. What even was the curse?" I asked, sitting beside her on the stairs. Deb looked surprised for a moment when I told her that I had seen something in a dream, but she quickly shook her head, as if she had shaken off a thought, and continued. "The curse that my people placed on the town wasn't complete. It had two parts. They intended to enact a curse that would keep the townspeople trapped in the town and on the land they stole for all of eternity, damning their souls to reside in a permanent limbo of sorts. They could die, but their spirits could never leave the town. The second half of the curse was to keep them trapped for all time in a certain time period, but before they could finish casting the curse, they were interrupted. By who or what I didn't know, but for some reason things went awry. The town is tied to the land, but if you can figure out how, you can travel backwards or forwards in time, because time is relative within the town. Like how I did with Mr. Elberton." "Yeah, just like that. But you have to be careful, because you can never come back to the same moment in time as when you left." "That explains a lot," I said, when suddenly a thought hit me so hard. "The townspeople are they all dead?" "Yes, they died long ago in the night of the raid. No one survived except those living in the hotel. After that night, the hotel began to have a series of caretakers, all of which weren't a part of the town originally, but had entered into it at some point. Every year, a member of my tribe would come to the hotel around the anniversary of the night raid to see if the hearts of the townspeople had changed or if the caretaker cared about what had been done. But until you, no one did." "So that's what you meant about me." "Yeah." As we sat there, I understood more of why things had gone down the way they had. I was grateful for the mercy of the ancient spirits and the warriors, as well as from Deb. Maybe now, we could move forward and begin to heal the wounds of the past. I hoped we could at least. Either way, I decided the best place to start would be to clean up the hotel. We were going to have more visitors soon, and we needed to be ready. So as I stood up from the stairs and walked over to the cleaning closet behind the desk, Deb rose as well. I came back with 2 brooms and handed her one. Maybe we could begin by cleaning the hotel together. So, after about 2 weeks of cleaning, restoration, and some minor repairs, we finally got the hotel back in order. I was thankful for Deb's help and company. It helped ease the workload and kept me from being lonely. I hadn't noticed until then how lonely I had been at the hotel and in the town, mainly for friendly company. I loved my old job for its ever-present companionship from co-workers, and I wondered why the owners, Mary and Martha, had only ever hired one caretaker at a time, especially given that at any one time the job could easily capture the attention of 3 or 4 people. At any rate, I came to look forward to the various guests that would drop by, or the visits I would get from the townspeople. The morning after everything was finished, Deb came down the stairs, luggage in tow, and a cheerful-looking Wally on her shoulder. At last it came time for her to leave us at the Hotel Bella Muerte, and, to be honest, despite our differences and all that had transpired between us, I was sad to see her go. In the 2 weeks after the yearly night raid, we had become quite close. We spoke often of times long past, and she shared all the information on the town and hotel that she knew. It gave me clarity and a new focus. If I was going to be stuck for the rest of my life in a haunted and mysterious town, I was going to make the most of it. She and I said our goodbyes and she left, closing the door behind her, making the ever-silent hotel seem even more daunting. As I stood there just past the threshold, staring towards the recently closed door, I heard a sound coming from upstairs. The sound of someone or something muttering began to tumble down the stairs from up above. I was curious to see what it was, thinking it could maybe be our residential Jesus, but wanted to check just to make sure. As I walked up the stairs, it seemed like the sound kept moving away from me rather than getting closer. Strange that I hadn't found the source of the sound yet. I was hoping to find it soon because it was repetitive and slightly annoying. But as soon as I would come close to where I thought the sound was, it would flee before me unseen and go back into another part of the hotel. At last, I thought I had it cornered in room number 11, but it quickly jumped to room number 12 across the hall. Not to be one undone by a phantom sound, I dashed across the hall and thrust open the door in a flash, only to see something I had never seen before. In the room was, of course, the normal things you would hope to see in a hotel. A bed, a small sitting area, and a bathroom. As I entered the room, I walked in to see nothing. Not a single, solitary soul. That was when the sound started up again, except this time it was in the bathroom. I quickly proceeded to enter the room, and that's when I found the source of the sound. There, in the bathtub, at the very bottom was an orb. A shiny, glowing, floating, bluish orb. I wasn't sure what it was, so I didn't touch it in case it could bite me. After standing there a minute, I was able to distinguish the sound of a small child, perhaps even an infant's babbling, cooing, and crying. After a few more moments, I grabbed the plunger from beside the toilet and gave it a quick poke. It was a solid mass that moved as I pushed it, about half a foot in diameter and equally round, wavering and wobbling like a bubble would. At my touch, it seemed offended, just as I'm sure I would have been if someone had pushed into me with a toilet plunger, and it fled from me down the drain, crying out as it went. I could then hear its mumbled and muttered sound going through the hotel once again. Great, I thought. Now we have a bathtub pipe ghost. Just when I think everything is getting back to normal, I'm hit with this. Not knowing anything about plumbing, I decided to seek out the help of our residential handyman, Jasper Moon, hoping he could do something about the bathtub ghost. Over the past 2 weeks, Jasper had been almost indispensable. After the raid happened, he helped fix up most of the town. As it turned out, he was very handy with a wrench, a screwdriver, and a hammer. I got to know him a little better during that time, and honestly, he was almost likable. Almost. He had a certain way about him that made you feel safe and protected, even if he could be a jerk. I didn't mind, though, when I saw the quick progress he made in the restoration of the hotel. I made my way down to the first floor, out the front door, and headed for the post. Once there, I knocked on the door before entering and heard Jasper call out, "It's open." I walked in, taking note of how good the new door looked, especially in comparison to the rest of the place, and entered. "Hi, Jasper. How are you today?" "Doing just fine. And you?" "Well, I got a problem," I told him, coming closer to where he was in the back of the room, sitting in the rocking chair. You always seem to, don't you?" he retorted with a chuckle. "Not always. Well, maybe some of the time. Anyways, I got a pipe ghost." What?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Pipe ghost in the bathtub in room number 12, I said, now fully aware how strange what I had just told him sounded. And what did this pipe ghost do? Did it yell boo at you?" No, it just cried and babbled like a baby or some small child, I said as I crossed my arms defensively. Ah, I know what you mean now. What you just described is actually the spirit of an unborn baby. And since it never had a body at the time of the raid, it can't take a form other than an orb. I've seen a few before. Never stuck in a bathtub pipe, though. I'll take care of it. Just give me a few. Great. Thank you, I replied, before I realized what I said. Was that a thank you I heard? No, I said, turning on my heel, walking away before he could tease me further, leaving the key to room number 12 on the table as I went. I decided to walk around the town then, thinking of visiting the only buildings left in the town that I hadn't already seen. I came to the pharmacy, and as I stood before it, I became curious as to what the building held. I entered with a ding above me. There, on the other side of the room, spanning the entire length, was a counter with hundreds of jars lining the shelves behind it containing various herbs and roots of plants. I had never seen an old-timey pharmacy before, and it piqued my interest. On the other side of the store were all types of candies, anything from mints to licorice to chocolate and hard candy. I loved the look of the place. It was very inviting. On the counter sat a bell. Interested to meet who ran the place, I rang it. In seconds, an older man, probably around the age of 70 if I didn't know any better, came from a back room. He had a cheery, wrinkled smile that was very charming, long white and gray hair, and a creamy complexion that was dotted with liver spots. He wore the appropriate time period clothing, a pair of slacks and a plaid shirt with an apron sitting over it. He looked kind as he walked up with a slight limp. I stood at the corner as he came up slowly, waiting to greet him. That's when I recognized him as one of the townspeople that had stood with us in the line during the raid. "Good day, ma'am. How can I help you today?" he asked politely. "I'm wonderful. I just came to say hi and introduce myself to you. Now that things are settled at the hotel, my name's Autumn Winters." "Nice to finally properly meet you, Miss Winters. I'm Mr. Joseph Hurd. I was hoping you would stop by my shop one day," he said with a cheery voice. "I'm sorry it's taken so long. I would have been by sooner to return a few pill bottles, but I'm afraid they got lost during the raid. I wish I could still give them to you." "It's of no consequence. I can make more for whoever they belong to. I'm just happy to finally meet the new caretaker." "Well, I'm happy to meet you as well. I always wanted to see what an old pharmacy looks like, and I must say, it doesn't disappoint." "I'm glad you like it, but I'm afraid I have a lot to do at the moment and I gotta get back to my work. I hope you don't mind. Otherwise, I would invite you in for some tea and chat a little further," he said as he looked up at me with a sorry look on his face. "Oh, that's perfectly fine. I should probably be getting back to the hotel myself. I'll hopefully be able to stop by when we both aren't so busy one day, and I'll take you up on that tea offer," I said, smiling. He smiled back and told me, "You have a great day, Miss Winters, and be sure to get a piece of candy on the way out. All the kids used to call me the Candy Man." With that, he turned to go back into the back room, leaving me alone once again in the store. I walked the various aisles looking at the different types of candy before making my selection. I finally decided on a peppermint stick the length of my hand and took it from the jar it sat in. It had been so long since I had had any candy. I began to lick it immediately, enjoying the sweet flavor and the minty aftertaste. I loved peppermint. It had to be my favorite candy over all others. Simple, but good nonetheless. I continued to suck on the hard candy as I left the pharmacy on my way back to the hotel. As I stood before the hotel, I became aware that suddenly I felt funny. Not bad, just funny. I began to walk a little slower, trying to determine what it was that was making me feel so strange. That's when I spat the candy out onto the sandy earth. The candy! I had forgotten the rules once again. Rule number 130, never take candy from the pharmacist. I was instantly worried, especially after the stamp incident. I quickly made my way back into the hotel in case I needed to lie down. Once inside, I heard a banging noise coming from upstairs. I walked up the steps, still feeling strange, and made my way towards the newest sound. I found Jasper in room number 12, banging on the pipes underneath the sink with a wrench. "I think I've almost got it to come out," he stated as he continued banging. "Jasper, what now?" he asked, looking at the worried look on my face. "So, I may or may not have taken and started eating candy from the pharmacist. What happens now?" "Oh my God, you didn't. I don't think you're gonna like what happens next." What happens?" I asked, fear creeping up in my voice. He took a deep breath in and started. "You're not gonna like it, but unfortunately, you're gonna grow a tail and antlers." As he said that, a mischievous smile played on his face, and I knew he was just kidding. I swatted at him and said, "Not as big as the bump on your head that you're gonna get from me." He chuckled and went on to say, "Oh, nothing bad's gonna happen. You'll just see things that aren't there for a little while." I looked at him long and hard to see if I could tell he was kidding or not, but I couldn't see any evidence that he was. Oh, great, I'm gonna be seeing pink elephants. Not quite. The things you'll see are real, or at least were. You'll just see events that happened unfold. Well, at any rate, I think I'll go to my room for a while and just wait for things to happen then," I responded, turning from the doorway of the bathroom and heading to my room. I sat down on the edge of my bed and kicking my shoes off. I figured if I was going to be seeing things, I might as well get comfortable, so I laid down on the bed and got settled. I made a mental note to rewrite all the rules I could remember later, since the original letter I had got destroyed in the raid. I figured I could even add a few of my own. In only a few moments, I had closed my eyes, and right about the time I started to drift off to sleep, I heard a woman scream. My eyes shot open, and I glanced around the room to see if I could see where the scream had come from, but I saw nothing. After a few minutes of not hearing anything, I started to settle back down into the bed. I once again closed my eyes, when suddenly, I heard the scream once again. I shot up in the bed, just in time to see someone run into the room. It was a woman dressed in a flowing white nightgown. I stared for a few moments at her before I recognized her. Her black hair was down and fell just below her waist. Her brown eyes were filled with fear, and her tan hands were shaking. The raid had begun in the hotel. She came hurriedly over to the edge of the bed, standing at the foot of it as I watched two identical twin girls run towards her into her arms. It was Rosa Bennett. She quickly hurried the girls from the room, and I got up from the bed and followed. They hurried down the hall, and passing by the open door to room number 15, and headed to the dining room with Mr. Bennett not far behind. Mr. Bennett and Rosa both quickly blocked off the door to the dining room using whatever they could: tables, chairs, and dinner carts. Once the door was blocked, they huddled in the far corner of the room, the whole family together behind a tipped-over table. Mr. Bennett had a rifle ready to go, propped atop the corner of the table. Rosa held the little girls as tears streamed down the three of their faces. That was when I saw a sudden change in Rosa's face, like an idea had hit her harder than a freight train. She jumped up from the floor and ran to the kitchen and came back with jars and jars of spices and herbs. She sat on the floor making a ring of salt around her. She burned various herbs and spices in the center and spread the ashes on the salt as she began to speak phrases in Latin. The room began to shake, and the walls grumbled under the strain of the overwhelming pressure that settled in the room. Her voice began to echo and grow louder with every passing second. Finally, she slid her hand, blood pouring out into the middle of the circle. Then, as soon as the rumbling began, it stopped. In its place, a sudden yellow glow illuminated the room from the center of the circle and expanded ever outward, through the walls and out of the hotel, throughout the entire town and surrounding land before petering out and disappearing. Whatever she did stopped the rage from continuing upon the hotel. The dead could no longer enter. My hallucination faded then, and I blinked a couple of times before I was seeing things as they were currently. The tables and chairs had all gone back to what they had been before, and the dinner carts were once again lined against the walls. Everything looked normal. I tried to shake off what I had just seen, though I was very curious to find out what the spell she had cast was. I figured if anyone knew, it might be the librarian. I made up my mind to go to the library, feeling much better now, and find out if she knew what Rosa had done that night. Once at the library, I entered into the room. I loved the smell of books and the way their pages bent and crinkled. Libraries always felt like home to me, even if the librarian scared the crap out of me. I walked up to the librarian's desk and waited for her to look up. It only took a few moments before she did so, and when she finally did, she had a look of annoyance on her face. "Can I help you?" she asked incredulously. Hi, I'm looking for a letter that was sent to Miss Rosa Bennett by her grandmother. Can you please tell me if there is a record or copy of the letter here?" I asked politely. "You're looking for her letter?" she asked questioningly. "Well, yeah. I was hoping I could read it to find out some information on the hotel." She continued to look at me for a few minutes before answering. "If you go upstairs, right-hand side, in the town records section, you can find the letter in a locked glass cabinet in the binder of hotel records. Here's the key," she said as she opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out a shiny skeleton key. "I have to warn you, though, no one has ever been able to read it. It's entirely in Spanish and Latin." "Thanks." I started up the right staircase. Entering the records section of the library, I saw the glass case the librarian had talked about. I hurried over and put the key into the lock. And turning it, the door to the case wouldn't budge for a moment, but quickly gave way. I opened it with a squeak, and peering inside of the giant binder. I carefully pulled it out and walked over to one of the tables and pulled out a chair as I laid the binder on the table. As I opened it, it made that crinkling sound I loved, and it smelled old. Being made of leather, red in color, with ornate patterning on the front. It looked beautiful. The records the red binder held were all types. Everything from records of the people that stayed at the hotel, to little warning notes about the hotel and even daily logs about the happenings of the hotel. The binder held so much. In the very front of the binder was the letter, just as the librarian said, written all in Spanish. Thankfully, I had become quite proficient in Spanish in high school, and living where I did, I was able to stay fluent in the language. I began to read the letter. The first half of the letter was just Rosa's grandmother writing and sharing all that had happened in her last correspondence. Towards the middle, however, was where she started detailing the various spells and curses that Rosa could use. They ranged from the mundane to the extraordinary, most in Spanish and a few in Latin. I read through all of them that I could, but none of them were like the protection spell Rosa told me she used in the vision I had. I flipped through the various pages. There were quite a few, and on the last page towards the bottom was one particular spell written in Latin. It was long and had many ingredients used in it. Being as long as it was, and recognizing some of the words as being the ones Rosa had spoken in my hallucination, I was sure the spell was the one. After sitting for a moment and thinking of anybody in the town that could translate, I finally settled on Mr. Hurd. Being the pharmacist, I was sure he had to know some Latin. I closed the door to the cabinet, noticing then that there were over a dozen other cabinets with binders in them all around the room. I then walked downstairs with the binder. I stopped by the desk to ask the librarian if I could borrow the binder, but she was gone to lunch, a note sitting on the top counter. It read,
"Gone to lunch and be back in a few. If you need to borrow the binder, go ahead. Just make sure to bring it back in 2 weeks. Miss Wilma Brown."
After I left the library, I headed straight for the pharmacy, hoping the pharmacist would be able to help me. I entered the store and saw Mr. Hurd standing at the counter, mixing what I assumed was drugs together. "Mr. Hurd, do you have a moment? I need to ask you something." He turned around and smiled. Of course. Please, come on over. What can I help you with?" I walked up the counter and asked, "Do you by any chance speak Latin?" He looked up at me as his face lit up. Yeah, I do. I had to learn it in school long ago. I'm a little rusty, though, I gotta warn you." "Rusty is better than nothing. Can you translate this last page for me, or at least tell me the gist of what it says?" "Of course, it would be my honor," he replied. I handed over the letter and flipped to the back page. As he stood there a moment, trying to decipher the words, he suddenly got a funny expression on his face. "What sort of letter is this?" "It's a letter between Rosa Bennett and her grandmother. She cast a spell the night of the first night raid by the villagers. I need to know what it says. Can you tell me?" "Well, yeah, but..." "But what?" I said as I tried to draw it out of him. "You aren't gonna like what it says." "So you can read it?" "Yeah. It's basically a protection spell, but it has its drawbacks. The spell itself offers the ultimate protection over the ones it's cast over. However, there's a catch." "What do you mean, catch?" I asked, trying to push him to get to the point. "The catch is that once enacted, you have to sacrifice your future generations. At least one person per generation, to forever be bound to the place you cast the safety net over. Whether that be a house, a business." He trailed off. "A hotel?" I asked. "Yeah, even a hotel. And it seems that was what she did," he finished telling me. I had a lot to think about. What the spell meant, what had bound Rosa's descendants to the hotel, and what all that had to do with the town. "Thank you, Mr. Hurd. I really appreciate your time in translating the letter. I hope that you have a good day." He handed the letter back to me as I placed it into the binder. "I hope that helps you. You have a wonderful day as well." I walked out of the pharmacy and headed back to the hotel. Once I walked into the lobby, I was greeted by an unfamiliar sight. Standing there in the lobby, dressed all in red, was a new visitor. Standing in the lobby was the lady in red. She turned to look at me as I stood there, a smile emerging on her face. Here in the bright light of the day as it strewn in from the windows, illuminating her dress and sending a warm red glow around the room, she looked more beautiful than ever. Before, in the dimly lit dining room the first night I saw her, her dress seemed to match the year 1856. But now that I could see her fully, it looked more akin to a dress set in the early 1900s. This confused me further about her, not knowing where, or rather, when she came from. All I knew at the time was that she was somehow linked to the town. "Miss Winters, it is good to see you. I told you it would be sooner than later." "It's good to see you as well. How may I help you today at the Hotel Bella Muerte?" "Oh, I'd like a room, please. Anyone will do." I crossed the floor and went behind the desk. "What name should I put on your door plate?" "Just put Lily Bennett, dear." My eyes shot up from where I had begun to write her name down into the logbook. "Excuse me, did you just say Lily Bennett?" "I certainly did. Lily Bennett," she repeated. I was curious at this point and decided to push my luck. You aren't by any chance related to the Bennetts who built and own this hotel, are you?
Why, yes I am. I'm the great-granddaughter of Rosa and John Bennett,
she answered proudly.
I don't understand.
If you are the great-granddaughter of the original Bennetts, how do you have their last name? They only had 2 daughters.
How do you know they only had 2 children?
She said with a mischievous smile. Well, the picture upstairs only had Mary and Martha in it. Are you saying that they had more children after them? I asked, now very confused.
I didn't say that, dear. They had 2 children before them, another set of twins named William and Wesley Bennett.
Where were they then? I've never seen a picture of them, I asked, hoping I wasn't wrong.
They were already grown by the time their parents and youngest sisters decided to come out west, and they stayed back east and continued to run their father's business.
I see. And you're which one's granddaughter?
I'm Wesley's granddaughter. My father was his son.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that, I said as I continued to fill out her name card. Did you ever have any children? She let out a loud laugh that rang out through the entire hotel, melodious in sound.
Oh, heavens no. I was too busy being the caretaker of the hotel.
I paused a moment, thinking I hadn't heard her right. You were a caretaker of the hotel?
Why, yes. I took care of the hotel for years before I figured out how to time hop. I never had time to have children after that.
How were you the caretaker if the brothers stayed back east?
Well, I came out west, silly. Listen, we have a lot to talk about and a lot to catch up on, but for right now, I'm tired from my journey and would like to rest.
Well, then, follow me and I'll get you settled in room number 12. There's no longer any pipe ghosts in that room currently, so don't worry. We then went up the stairs as I took her to her room. I had picked up her luggage on the way up and was surprised by how heavy it was. It felt like she was carrying a ton of rocks in them. I tried to handle them carefully as we went down the hallways. I was grateful when we finally reached her room. I unlocked her door and set her luggage just inside. She thanked me, and I headed down to the lobby as she got settled. I was still confused from all the thoughts fighting to take precedence in my mind. Not only did I just find out that the lady in red was a Bennett, but that she was also a former caretaker of the hotel that knew how to time jump. It made me wonder how many other former caretakers there were like this. I also had a lot to think about with the letter I had just gotten translated. What did the curse truly mean? And was there a way to break it if so? As I walked down the hallways on my way to the lobby, I reflected on these things, hardly being able to wait for Miss Lily to wake up to ask her all of my questions. Once in the lobby, I noticed something that Lily had dropped. It was a small, engraved locket. At first, I thought it was mine because they looked just alike. I opened hers to reveal an old black and white photo of 2 people, arguably a husband and wife, standing in front of a building. On the other side of the locket was another photo, black and white as well, of another couple. If it wasn't for the photos, I would have certainly thought it was mine. I held mine up that I was wearing for comparison. Both were solid, polished gold lockets, with roses engraved on the front and a saying on the back reading, "I love you" on hers and "to the moon and back" on mine. This became a conundrum for me. If this locket wasn't mine, and if the locket was hers, why were they so similar? I suddenly looked up from the lockets when I heard a loud sound from outside. I ran to check it out, wondering what could possibly have made such a loud noise. Once at the window, I could see exactly what. It was Mr. Wilkins. Now, Mr. Wilkins was a strange character. He always toted a gun on his shoulder and a bottle of booze in the other hand. He was perpetually drunk and smelled like a distillery, and he looked like he hadn't bathed once in the entire 2+ centuries since the town's founding. He was hard to look at and harder to understand because he was constantly slurring his words. The first time I had met him, he was drunk off his ass sitting in a water trough at the edge of town near the gas station. It was the closest thing to a bath as he ever got. The next time I saw him, he was passed out on top of the post office roof, snoring the shingles off, and Jasper trying to poke him with a broom handle to get him the hell off his roof. The last time I'd seen him, he had decided to eat a lot of candy from the pharmacy, which I now know makes you hallucinate and chase fake butterflies while stumbling around town, running into buildings and such. This time, it appeared that he was shooting a rifle into the center of town at something. What, I didn't know, and yelling profanities and harbingers of great doom. I was about to go outside when he shot again, this time the bullet going through the library window. I watched on as a librarian came outside, squawking and shrieking at him and chasing him all over the street. It was quite comedic to see. After a while of sitting and relaxing in the lobby, I heard someone come down the stairs. I turned to see who it was and saw Lily coming down. She had changed her dress, though still red in color, into a floral print that suited her well. I couldn't imagine her in anything but red. She smiled at me as she came down the stairs. I retrieved the locket and handed it out to her. "I think you may have lost this," I told her. "Oh, my stars, I'm so glad you found it. I looked everywhere for it in my room. I'm surprised I didn't feel it slip off." "Can I ask you a question? About the locket, I mean." "Of course. Do you like it?" "I love it. Where did you get it from?" I replied, having hidden my own under my shirt. "It was given to me as a present by my great-aunt Mary. Their father had a locket set made for the twins when they were little. When I knew them, they were quite old, but they loved to give presents," she said as she placed the locket back around her neck. Before I could ask her any further questions about the locket, we heard a door slam from upstairs. We both looked at each other and moved towards the stairs to see what had caused the sound. Right about the time we both reached the stairs, more doors began to open and slam shut, one at a time, starting from one end of the hall to the other. This had become a nearly regular occurrence. It was as if a ghost didn't like my being here at the hotel and wanted to make their frustrations known. I looked back at Miss Lily. Her face said that she was somewhere between knowing what had made the sound, but yet not knowing why. "What is that? What keeps doing it? It's happened frequently over the last 2.5 weeks." "I'm not sure," she said hesitantly. "Did this ever happen with you?" I continued, hoping she'd reveal more. "A couple of times, yes, but never like this," she told me as she turned from the staircase back towards the lobby as she continued on to the sitting room. I followed her and thought to ask, "What can you tell me about this hotel? There's so much that I already know, but at the same time, so many things I don't." "It's simple for the most part, depending on the situation. The normal duties are easy to learn. It's the supernatural things that make the job unpredictable. I've found, though, that there are many loopholes and ways to get around much of it. I could write you a list of things that detail what all to do in certain situations if you like." I wasn't about to pass up on this offer. "Yeah, please, I would love that, especially since I lost the first one." I ran to grab some paper from the desk in the lobby and came back to where she sat. Over the next few hours, we sat and talked, and she shared much of her first-hand knowledge of the hotel, as she wrote for me a new list of rules and tips to keep the hotel running. It turns out, there were a lot of things that could be changed about the town and hotel. I had the power and finances to change the decor of the hotel as I wished and erect new buildings in the town. The only catch was, I had to have everything built from materials placed just inside the town line without sucking a new person into the town. It was a difficult task, but not an impossible one. Knowing this, I got excited because the town had been in such disrepair, but knowing I could improve it gave me great satisfaction. She also told me that the dolls in the doll room were made in likeness of the past caretakers. When the caretakers died, their souls were bound to the town, and instead of having too many at any given time, their souls were chased into the dolls to keep them safe and sound and from tripping over one another. I thought that made sense. It also explained why there were no other caretakers around except for me and Lily. The doll I found outside my door was actually one of the more practical jokers of the crowd. That made me feel a little better about them, but saddened as well. They meant no harm to me or the tenants of the hotel, but they were also trapped in that room day in and day out. It just wasn't fair. I decided that I would no longer, unless I had a resident at the hotel, face them to the walls at night, but instead give them free reign over the hotel at night, even if the thought of walking, talking dolls still gave me the heebie-jeebies. I learned too that Mr. Elberton was also a former caretaker like Lily, who gave up the caretaking life to time travel. I thought that was fitting, as he seemed the type of person never able to sit still in one place for too long. I asked Lily how they were able to time jump, but she refused to tell me. Her reason being that once you start, you can't stop, since you can never go back to the exact same time as you left. Only Mr. Elberton knew how to come close. I got lucky and only wound up being a few minutes shy of the time I left when I returned. The sun began to set in the distance, and we both decided to retire for the night. I wasn't yet ready to go to bed, so I decided that I would read my new list of rules. The first 10 rules were as follows. Rule number 1. The unborn ghosts can be caught with a net. Just catch them and release them outside. Rule number 2. Don't ever accept a drink from Mr. Wilkins. Rule number 3. Leave the spiders in the cellar out back alone. 4. Never plant beans on a full moon. 5. Always accept the pie from Miss Millie. Just be sure to never eat it. 6. Don't go to the gas station at night. Weird things happen there. 7. If you meet someone named William Walker, don't take him up on the offer of a horseback ride. Number 8. Don't ever fall into Mr. Bell's trap. Number 9. Never walk outside after dusk. And rule number 10. And above all things, never insult the librarian. There were several other rules. These were just the first 10. The rules were simple enough, and this time they were given to me by someone I trusted, even though I only met her twice. She seemed trustworthy enough. I, at least, had no reason to distrust her. I tried to keep in mind what she had told me that day, making my way to the bathroom to do my nightly routine, and trying to keep everything straight. Once finished, I jumped into bed and snuggled in. I fell fast asleep in minutes, only to be rudely awakened by a knocking on my door. I got up to investigate and see who it was. At my door was the strangest thing by far, something I think I'll never truly get used to. Nothing. Whenever there was nothing present to have made a sound or bump in the night, it always freaked me out more than if there had been something there. I leaned out my door and looked down the hall. Nothing. I stepped out into the hall, and that's when I saw it. A dark figure perched between the corner of the ceiling and the wall to my right at the end of the hall. Entirely black, it sat there, with only the whites of his eyes showing, a Cheshire cat grin growing on its face with sharpened white teeth as it turned its head to the side to get a better look at me. I screamed out, completely petrified by the sight before me. Being in the very presence of the entity felt oppressive and dark, like great evil exuded from it. I heard a door swing open, and out of the corner of my eye, saw Miss Lily come running down the hall. She grabbed my arm and dragged me down the hall with her. Almost on cue, the phantom being leaped from its perch following after, coming after us almost faster than we could run.
As we came to her door, she slammed it shut as the entity bashed against it. She cried out for help, and I ran to her aid. Between the two of us, we were just barely able to shut the door and lock it. Out of breath, we sank to the floor as the banging and scratching continued on the other side of the door. What was that? I asked, my chest still heaving. Did you forget to lock the front doors? I paused to think. Yeah, I think I did. It's one of the evil spirits that lives on the land. It was called when the native people placed the curse on the town. Anywhere there is a lot of pain or suffering, they come at night, in the dark, where the sun can't touch them. So that was what they and them referred to in the list. And then I thought to ask, what do we do? Is there a way to get rid of them? Right then, there was a second one at the window. It looked the same as the first one, only this one had an even wider smile. It tapped at the window as Lily spoke. There's nothing we can do but wait it out till the morning. They leave then. Won't they get inside before then? No, they have to be invited in through woods or an open door. They can't reach us in here, but they would try everything they can to enter. They can speak with voices not their own, voices that sound like friends and family members. They can even shapeshift into more pleasant forms. That's why the door to the hotel is locked for the night and not open till morning, she said, moving from the floor to the window and closing the curtains on the now furious beast. Let us in, little piggies. The voice hissed from the other side of the door. We want to come in. Yeah, neither of us were about to do that. We stood our ground on our side of the door, not moving or talking. Then we heard a voice we recognized from the outside, just down below the hotel. Help me, dear God, someone, please help me. The voice yelled in mixed fear and pain. It was Jasper. I turned to the window to open it, but Lily stopped me just in time before I had the chance to undo the latch. No, don't do that. It'll get inside, she whispered. But Jasper needs help, I whispered back, urgency growing in my voice. That isn't Jasper, that's them. They speak with voices others remember, she replied, pulling me to the center of the room. The best thing we can do is stay put, no matter what we think we hear. Why are they doing this? They always have. It's just part of the stupid curse those horrible Indians placed on us. I wish they had shot them all and none of this would have ever happened, she replied, as I tried to ignore the blatant hatred towards the people of the land. I plopped down then on the couch in the room, sighing deeply. This was going to be a long night and I wasn't sure I was prepared for it. We continued to sit there till dawn, listening to the creatures that now had to number at least 8, take on voices of the people we knew and had known, trying to get us to open the door or windows. We could hear them pacing the halls and growling and mumbling, practicing their words with different inflections, tearing apart the hotel and breaking things. Come dawn, we were exhausted and our nerves were shot. We sat there till we were sure that they were gone before we opened the door. We looked into the halls and up to the ceiling and saw nothing. We had made it. I thanked her for saving me and headed back to my room. I decided to go back to bed to finally get some rest. I could pick up and clean the hotel later. Right now, all I needed was a good, long sleep. But, of course, just as I fell asleep, I heard the sound of a gun going off in the distance. Sounded like Mr. Williams was up and ready to face the day. I didn't wake for the rest of that day. I didn't wake up that night either. I slept through and woke up the next day. Thankfully, in my absence, Lily had taken care of things for me, cleaning up after the creatures and taking care of the nightly routine. When I finally awoke, The room was bright and sunny, and I felt 100% better from the rest. I looked at the clock that read 12 p.m. I was shocked that I had slept for so long, but I guess my body needed it. I got up from bed and dressed in a red t-shirt with a pair of ripped jeans and a faded jean jacket, along with my favorite sneakers. I decided against applying makeup because I wanted to explore the town more, given that there was nothing better to do. I made my way downstairs. As I did so, I happened to look at the picture just outside my room, the one that had always made me feel uneasy. I looked closer at it and for the first time noticed the 2 gold lockets hanging around the twin necks. I looked at how beautiful they were and wondered if somehow I wound up with the other locket in the set. There was a 3rd locket I noticed as well that hung around Rose's neck. It looked eerily similar. So, there are 3 lockets. Very interesting. I pried myself away from the painting and walked downstairs to find Lily in the sitting room. "How are you, sleepyhead? You get enough rest?" she teased. "Only a little." I played along. "Well, now that you are ready to face the day, what do you plan on doing? I do admit that it does get quite boring here, especially since this is a ghost town and hardly anyone knows of its existence," she said as she turned the page of the old newspaper that she had found who knows where. I was about to answer her when I noticed that on the front page of the paper was a picture of the town in its heyday. It was beautiful and there were so many buildings. I quickly got an idea that refused to leave my mind. I wanted to rebuild the town. I had all the time in the world, a whole near empty town at my disposal, and enough money from my own funds. My yearly salary had more than doubled, remember, to support the rebuilding. It was a perfect idea. I quickly broached the subject with Lily, projecting my idea to her. "Lily," I started, "what do you think of rebuilding the town?" "What, do you mean knocking everything down and starting over?" she asked, confused. "No, not knocking everything down. We could just add on to what's already here and restore all the old buildings that still stand." "Well, I don't suppose that's a bad idea, but how do you plan on doing that? Everyone who comes to the town except the natives gets stuck here. How will you get supplies in and all that?" I hadn't thought of that, but maybe I could call up Deb and ask her if someone from her people would be able to bring us the things we need. Then I added, and to ask permission to build on the land, of course. "Why do you need permission from them? It's our land," she replied. "Because despite what you may think of them, their opinion matters because this was their land to begin with," I snapped at her. I ignored her comment from the other night, but I wasn't going to allow her to continue talking bad about the Pueblo people. "There's no need to get moody," she retorted. "Besides, the opinion you really need is Mary and Martha's." I calmed down a little. "Well, I suppose it wouldn't be bad to get their opinion too, but I don't have their number." "Just let me handle that. I'll ask them in person," she said with a wink. "Do you think they'd be okay with it?" "I'm sure they would be, given that they watched their home burn. To be honest, I'm surprised they never rebuilt it themselves. But then again, they probably ran into the supplies problem." "Well, it's settled then. You talk to them, and I'll talk to Deb." So that's what we did. I called up Deb, and after the usual phone pleasantries, we got down to business. The call lasted far longer than I expected. She got all her elders on the phone, and they made a few calls themselves. Long story short, after a lot of talking and debating, they agreed. I was so excited I could hardly contain it. All I needed was the approval of Mary and Martha, and I could rebuild the town. I immediately ran to tell Lily. She was so shocked that they had agreed. "So they actually said yes?" she asked, putting the paper down. "Yeah, They agreed as long as the town is no bigger than it was originally. Well, call me impressed. I don't know how you reasoned with them.
It's a little something called friendship and respect.
I guess I need to do my part then. I'll head out and try to reach them, but it may take a little time to do so. I would use the phone, but it only goes one way with them. I'll be back as shortly as possible. Until then, just don't forget to lock the doors,"
she said as she headed out the door into the edge of town. I stood there a few more moments before deciding that if I was to rebuild the town, I would need the proper blueprints and see who I could recruit. The best two people to help me were the librarian and Jasper, so off I went to seek out the help of the two. I decided I would go to the library first and just take a look at the blueprints and draw up some for myself. I'd always been good at it in my old job, and rebuilding pre-modern structures would be way simpler than postmodern ones. At least I thought. Once at the library, I figured the best place to start would be the record station upstairs. I nodded at the librarian, who merely just stared at me in return, and went up the stairs. It took me a few moments of looking and digging around, but I finally found them in the map area. I took the blueprints and spread one of them on the extra wide tables, and the first one took up the entire length. It was your average blueprint, nothing overly special about it at first examination, but it helped me get a feel for the layout of the town. I wanted to put it in place so that the new town was exactly the same as the last one. I noticed that there were originally a grand total of 13 buildings, including the one still standing. Starting at the edge of town was the gas station. How that had been built, I didn't know. And then there was the pharmacy, the library, the hotel, the post office, a carpenter shop, and a blacksmith and farrier. On the other side of the street that had been completely destroyed were the bank, a lawyer's office, a saloon and brothel, a general store, a butcher, and a jail on the far edge of town. I assume farmers and ranchers lived on the outskirts of town, but no houses were actually built. I placed the next blueprint on the table. This one was the blueprint of the hotel itself. I looked at the various rooms and was surprised to find there was an old safe hidden behind an old painting in the lobby. I had never really taken much notice of the painting, it being hung behind the desk to the side of the letterboxes towards the cleaning closet. It was a painting of the town back in its glory days, in color made from oil paints. It was a beautiful painting, but like I said, I had never taken much heed of it. I took a closer look at the safe's dimensions. It was a normal-sized safe, 2 feet tall and 3 feet in width, depth ranging from 3.5 to 4 feet, and according to the blueprints, was made of iron and steel. I was instantly curious. What was so special that it needed a safe? I figured the simple answer to that question was money from the various tenants and residents of the hotel. But nothing is ever really simple in this town, and especially not in the hotel. I decided to put aside the blueprints for now and head back to the hotel to see if I could take a closer look at the safe. Once back at the hotel, I walked around to the back of the desk and stood before the painting. I looked closer at it to see if I could make out who the painter was. After searching for a moment, I couldn't tell, but was amazed at the sheer skill of the painting itself. Whoever painted the scene was very good. Their brushstrokes were thin and precise, swooping and melding the colors where applicable, and they were light of hand and were able to properly capture the light and the true nature of a bustling town. I carefully took the painting down from the wall and set it against the desk behind me. And turning back around, I was now face to face with the mysterious safe. It was the size I thought it would be, yet somehow bigger than I imagined. It looked like your average safe made of strong metal, a turnstile-type mechanism popular back in the day, and a sturdy dial in the very center of it. I tried to open it, hoping that maybe the last person to open it was careless and left it unlocked, but unfortunately, as I'm sure you could have guessed, that wasn't the case. I played with the dial, hoping that maybe I could find the numbers to open it. I tried the date of the grand opening of the hotel. Nothing.
I tried the date of the first official soiree in 1856 that I attended. Nothing. Then, I tried the date the town first became official, and still nothing. I absent-mindedly played with the numbers, trying different dates and such with no further luck, when for some reason, I put my birth date in, 0901. Then, to my surprise, it opened. I was excited that the safe opened, but a little upset that, once again, it seemed like I had been pre-chosen for this job long before I had ever been born. I stood there a moment longer before I began to open the safe, floundering with my newest revelation. I tried to shake it off, and after a few more seconds I did, and then I opened the safe. The first thing I noticed was a note that sat in front addressed to me. I took it out and read it. "To our newest caretaker, congratulations, you found the safe. I hope you can use what's inside to help you keep track of various day-to-day happenings and events at the hotel and in town. If any questions arise, please feel free to make the most of the library and other buildings and people in the town to help you solve any issues that may arise. I hope you have a wonderful stay. Mary and Martha." A short but sweet note, piquing my curiosity even more about what the safe held. I looked inside to find a red binder, exactly like the ones in the library, blank inside and a fountain pen sitting atop it. I pulled those out and examined them, my name etched on the inside cover of the binder. I suppose perhaps all the other binders were given to the various caretakers to log their adventures, mishaps, and day-to-day life at the hotel. Taking note of this, I figured those binders would be worth a read sometime. And placing them on the desk, I continued to look inside the safe. The next thing I pulled out was an old map of the underground, beneath the town and its various tunnels and where they all led. I tucked that within my binder. It would be worth a visit someday as well. Under that was another piece of paper filled with names and lines connecting them, dates beside them, as well as noting what I assumed was the date of birth and death of each named person. It was hard to figure out what the paper meant. Some names had notes beside them. Others were circled and some had been underlined in red ink. My name was at the very bottom, circled multiple times and underlined in red ink with a note beside it saying, "She's the one," written boldly. It felt a little ominous, to be honest, especially not knowing the context or meaning behind it. I set that aside and continued to look around. In the bottom of the safe were two things: a gold engraved pocket watch and an old revolver. Now, I have not, nor will I ever be someone who feels comfortable around guns, so I carefully picked it up and set it to the side, just in case it was loaded, and grabbed the pocket watch. It was beautiful, being made of the shiniest gold, engraved with a picture of a bird flying in midair. It looked old, yet it still ran. I put it up to my ear to listen to it. My mother had given me one that had been passed down in my family for generations when I was young. I had always kept it. Even though it was rusty and worn down by time, it still worked. I remember sitting and putting it to my ear as a child, listening to all the intricate mechanisms that ran within. It often soothed me when I was frustrated or sad. I had loved it, even though it was in as bad shape as it was. Seeing this pocket watch, it made me want to fix up my own. I took the new watch away from my ear and placed it within my pocket. I figured it would come in use helping me keep track of time in the hotel, where time seemed strange and fluid. Since those were the last two things left in the safe, I left the gun behind and closed it back up. I took another look at the things I had on the desk and carefully looked through them, landing on the paper of names. Now that I had finished going through the safe, I could take a better look at the piece of paper. It was a long piece of parchment that I recognized. It was the same letterhead and parchment as my offer letter and my survival guide, every bit as long and lengthy. As I further unfolded it, the paper seemed to go on forever. Every name was linked in some way. The top name started with Rosa and John Bennett. It took me a moment of looking to realize I wasn't looking at random names, but actually a family tree. The Bennett family tree. With this realization, and taking into account my own name was on it, it made me wonder for the first time, why was I on this page? Not wanting to be interrupted, I took the paper to my room where I could spread it out and look at it better. Once I did this, the page seemed to make more sense. It was a huge family tree, and it seemed no name went unnoticed by whoever made it. The paper was long and wide. I trailed my finger down it as I read the names. I recognized a few from the doll room, each one circled. I figured after having taken a closer look, the names that had been circled were the names of former caretakers. The ones underlined in red ink and notes beside them were still a mystery. Some of the notes were strange.
This one is too contrary. He isn't up to any good. She is a cripple. They can't be separated. This one is too angry.
The list goes on. None of the notes made any sense to me, but whoever made the family tree, these notes must have helped them keep track of something. I followed the tree down, further and further, till finally I began to recognize the names. Sandra Parker was my great-grandmother. Eloise Williams and Sarah Fulton her children, and finally, Eloise's daughters, Mabel Moore and Helen Winters. Right under my mother's name was my own, Autumn. I was shocked to learn that I was descended from the Bennett family. I wanted to know if this was real or not. I figured the only way to find out was to go back to the library and check it out. Hopefully, there would have been some sort of documentation regarding the family lines of everyone in town. I walked with a hurried purpose back to the library. As I entered, the librarian gave me a "What the hell are you doing back again?" look as I rushed past her to the records department. I must have spent a good half hour looking through town documents and letters without any luck. That was when I decided to look through town newspapers. Somehow, there was a town's newspaper that had spanned the entirety of the town's existence. Who or what kept it going was a mini mystery in itself, but not one I had time to look through right now. I was dedicated to my current task of finding proof of my heritage. After looking through the papers, I finally found what I was looking for. Slowly but surely, I was able to match my birth announcements in the newspaper to the dates listed on the family tree. And sure enough, in each article it always read, "Newest addition to the Bennett family," followed by the name and time of birth of each member of the family tree and who the said child was related to. I must have sat there for hours mapping out my own family tree to compare it to the old one from the safe. Once I completed the new family tree, I compared it with the old one. Apparently, of the original Bennett children, only the twin sons ever had kids, whereas Lily Bennett hailed from Wesley Bennett. I descended from William's side. I sat there swimming in feelings of frustration, anger, and guilt. The very family that had caused so much heartbreak, pain, and suffering was not a stranger's family, but instead my own. As I sat there, I made a decision, one that I wouldn't go back down from then or in the future. The past wasn't going to stay buried and forgotten. It was going to be spoken with disgust or indifference. It wasn't going to be talked about in hushed whispers, and it certainly wasn't going to be perpetuated. Instead, the past was going to be laid bare, spoken of in reverence, and brought to light. I wrapped up what I was doing and headed back to the hotel to finish up my nightly duties and try to come to grips with my newfound heritage. Once back in my room, I pulled out the pocket watch from my pocket. I played with it in between my hands and felt the smoothness and coolness of the metal, and I placed it by my ear. I let the slow ticking soothe my nerves as I lay down on the sofa. I began to slowly drift off, while the clock steadily moved its hands unseen, putting me to restful sleep.